Hi Scorpio, and thank you for being here with me today. There's something quiet moving beneath the surface right now, especially around May 9th and 10th. And if you've been feeling like something inside you has started shifting without fully understanding why, this message may reach deeper than you expect. Not because life is suddenly becoming louder, but because the universe has a way of returning things softly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize something important has already begun changing inside you. The universe rarely announces these moments in advance. It does not arrive with dramatic signs or unmistakable warnings that your time has finally come. Instead, it starts giving back slowly, through moments that almost seem too small to matter at first. A conversation opens a part of you that has been emotionally closed for years. Someone returns carrying a different energy than before. A single quiet realization changes the way you see something you have been surviving around for much longer than you admitted to yourself. Have you ever felt that strange sensation that something was not truly lost, only hidden somewhere beneath the surface, slowly finding its way back to you? And along with that feeling comes another one, more difficult to explain. A hesitation before receiving. As if before allowing something good into your life, you first need to examine whether you deserve it. As if every moment of peace or connection must justify itself before you can fully let it enter. That is something Scorpio knows deeply, and it is not weakness. It is the result of years spent learning how to protect yourself emotionally, years spent building walls so carefully that eventually they stopped feeling like protection and started feeling like identity. Scorpio rarely loses pieces of itself carelessly. More often, those pieces are buried intentionally. A desire pushed down because exposing it felt unsafe. A truth swallowed because vulnerability seemed too dangerous. A need hidden behind silence because emotional control felt more survivable than being fully seen. And after a while, this becomes so natural that Scorpio may not even notice it happening anymore. Emotional restraint no longer feels like sacrifice. It feels responsible. It feels necessary. Sometimes it even feels like love, expressed through silence and self-control. Maybe part of it truly is. But there is a quiet difference between choosing privacy consciously and becoming someone who no longer remembers how to stop hiding. The deeper tension begins when Scorpio finally slows down long enough to look inward at what still remains. It is rarely a dramatic emptiness. Scorpio does not usually allow things to collapse that visibly. What appears instead is far more subtle. A feeling that somewhere along the way, a version of yourself disappeared into the shadows. Desires became harder to recognize. Words stayed buried so long, they no longer come naturally. Boundaries you knew should exist were never fully spoken, not because you lacked strength, but because surviving emotionally always seemed more urgent than honoring what was true inside you. And the universe noticed every part of it, Scorpio. Every truth you buried beneath silence. Every time you chose emotional control instead of exposing what was really happening inside you. Every moment you protected the outside world while quietly abandoning something honest within yourself. There is a force moving underneath all of this that is not mystical in the sense of fantasy, but real in the way the ocean is real, always shifting beneath the surface, whether anyone sees it or not. And eventually, that movement begins turning back toward you. That is where the question slowly rises, maybe one you have never fully allowed yourself to sit with before. What happens when the universe starts returning the very things you taught yourself to live without? What happens when life quietly places back into your hands the emotions, truths, or desires you once buried just to survive? For Scorpio, receiving has never been simple. To truly receive something, you first have to recognize that it belongs to you. And after years spent living behind emotional walls, that recognition can feel unfamiliar. Maybe that is why these days around May 9th and 10th feel different. Something hidden beneath the surface is beginning to move, And for the first time in a long while, you may be noticing parts of yourself that no longer want to stay buried. Scorpio has always had an instinct for sensing emotional imbalance in others, long before recognizing it within themselves. You can read tension in a room almost instantly. You can feel shifts in energy before anyone says a word. But when that same awareness turns inward, something changes. It becomes harder to ignore what you have been carrying alone, harder to pretend certain emotional truths no longer matter. You are already standing inside a moment of recognition right now. The discomfort has not fully passed yet, and honestly, that is why this message is finding you at the exact right time. Not after the emotions settle back into silence again, but now while there is still space for something honest to rise to the surface. And maybe this is the part Scorpio rarely talks about. The quiet exhaustion that comes from surviving emotionally for so long that receiving begins to feel more uncomfortable than giving. In the comments, tell me this, Scorpio. What truth have you kept hidden for so long that it almost became part of who you are? Write it below. Scorpio has a deeply intimate relationship with emotional control, so deep that sometimes control begins to feel safer than connection itself. But stillness is not the same thing as peace, and silence does not mean nothing exists underneath. The universe moves through energy exactly that way. Every hidden desire, every emotional need you swallowed before it could be spoken aloud, every moment you stepped backward emotionally so someone else could remain comfortable, none of it disappeared. Energy changes shape, it moves through unseen places, and eventually, after enough time passes, it begins finding its way back to you. Think about an investment you forgot you ever made. You stopped expecting anything from it long ago, and then one day something returns anyway. Not because life suddenly became random or generous without reason, but because deeper currents have been moving underneath the surface the entire time, quietly carrying things back toward you. For Scorpio, these returns rarely arrive in obvious forms. What comes back is often quieter than expected. Sometimes it is clarity, a sudden ability to see yourself honestly in a way you could not before. Sometimes it is strength appearing exactly when your old emotional defenses stop working. Sometimes it is an opportunity so subtle you nearly dismiss it because you have spent too long believing that anything truly important must arrive dramatically in order to be real. And there is a very specific reason Scorpio tends to underestimate these returns when they finally appear. Scorpio has spent so much time surviving emotionally that over the years it learned to measure the value of things through caution instead of desire. If something enters your life and seems meant only for you, without requiring you to protect anyone else or carry anyone else emotionally, your first instinct is often hesitation. You examine it carefully, you question it. You quietly ask yourself whether you are truly allowed to receive something that asks nothing from you in return. And after enough years of living this way, caution begins feeling safer than hope, even when your heart quietly longs for something softer. And this is one of the quietest patterns Scorpio carries, the invisible filter standing at the entrance of the heart. A filter created with good intentions, built from experience, built from self-protection, built from years of learning how to survive emotional disappointment before it arrives. But the problem is that this same filter cannot always tell the difference between what should be kept out and what was always meant to reach you. Sometimes, without realizing it, Scorpio pushes away the very things life has been trying to return. Not because you do not want love or connection, but because part of you still expects closeness to eventually become pain. Maybe that is why these days around May 9th and 10th feel different. Something inside you is becoming more aware of this pattern in real time. You are beginning to notice how often you have questioned your own worth before accepting love, clarity, peace, or even simple moments of emotional ease. And the deeper realization is not just that you have been protecting yourself, it is that somewhere along the way, protection became more natural than receiving. Emotional distance became a reflex long before you realized how lonely it could feel beneath the surface. But there is an order to how these returns unfold. It is not random, and it is not chaotic. Once you begin paying attention, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The first thing that usually returns to Scorpio is not some dramatic opportunity or sudden external validation. What returns first is something much quieter, and because it is quiet, it becomes easy to overlook. It may arrive as a feeling you cannot fully explain yet, a sense that something inside you is beginning to soften after years of staying guarded. A new clarity begins surfacing from beneath the emotional noise. You look at a relationship, a repeating pattern, a conversation you have been avoiding, or a truth you buried a long time ago, and suddenly you see it differently. Not because the world around you changed overnight, but because something inside you shifted slightly beneath the surface. And sometimes that small internal movement changes everything. One honest realization can alter the direction of your emotional life more than years spent trying to control it. After clarity comes movement. Opportunities begin appearing when Scorpio finally stops resisting them. A conversation happens because you no longer avoid what needs to be said. A door opens the moment you stop asking yourself whether you deserve to walk through it. A person enters your life at the exact moment you stop shrinking emotionally just to remain safe or unreadable. None of this happens by accident. It is life responding to openness. It is the universe noticing that your heart is no longer entirely hidden behind survival instincts. Imagine a letter sent long ago that never reached you, not because it was lost, but because emotionally you were nowhere to be found. You were surviving somewhere behind locked doors, hidden beneath old instincts, living inside versions of yourself built for endurance instead of connection. And when you finally return to yourself, to your real desires, to the truths you no longer want to bury beneath silence, the letter finally finds its way home. The message was never truly gone. You were simply too far removed from yourself to receive it before now. That is how this return works for Scorpio. Nothing was truly delayed. The emotional address simply changed over time. For years, you existed inside protective versions of yourself, inside spaces designed more for survival than honesty. But now, as Scorpio slowly reconnects with genuine desire, emotional truth, and boundaries created not to isolate, but to protect what matters, life begins finding a place to deliver what has been waiting for you all along. And the question that stays lingering beneath all of this is one Scorpio cannot avoid forever. When something arrives meant specifically for you, with no hidden obligation attached to it, no emotional debt, no need to justify its existence through service to someone else, can you finally open the door? That emotional address, the inner place where Scorpio truly exists beneath all the protection and restraint, becomes clearer the moment you stop living entirely through survival. The deeper truth is not that you lost yourself completely, but that over time you became more familiar with emotional armor than emotional honesty. And when all that energy that once went into guarding, analyzing, and anticipating everyone else finally begins turning inward, something important starts surfacing. You begin recognizing what actually belongs to you, instead of only noticing what everyone else needs. It feels unfamiliar at first, almost like walking into a hidden room inside yourself that has been closed for years, only to realize your real emotions have been waiting there quietly the entire time. And maybe that is why this moment feels so uncomfortable and so revealing at the same time. Things are beginning to arrive in your life differently now, but some part of you still hesitates before fully opening the door. Scorpio has spent so long protecting itself from disappointment, rejection, or emotional exposure that receiving can feel strangely unfamiliar, even when it is genuine. You may notice yourself pausing before trust, questioning kindness, or instinctively retreating the moment something begins feeling real. And beneath that hesitation is often an old fear that if you fully let something in, you may no longer know how to protect yourself from losing it again. Here is the contradiction Scorpio rarely speaks out loud. You can understand everyone else with frightening accuracy. You notice emotional shifts before words are even spoken. You know how to adapt, how to read silence, how to sense exactly what someone needs beneath the surface. But when the attention turns toward your own desires, your own emotional hunger, your own truth, there is often hesitation. Not because you lack depth, but because you were never taught to stay emotionally visible for long. Somewhere along the way, hiding became safer than being fully known. Receiving asks something different from Scorpio than giving ever did. It asks you to remain present without retreating behind control. It asks you to stay emotionally open long enough to let something reach you instead of analyzing it from a distance. And over the years, Scorpio learned slowly, almost invisibly, that full emotional exposure could create tension, vulnerability, or misunderstanding. So you became quieter in certain places, more guarded, more careful with what was revealed and what remained hidden beneath the surface. You learned how to survive storms emotionally, but not always how to rest once the storm had already passed. Now, as the universe begins quietly returning what belongs to you, Scorpio may not fully know how to stand still and simply receive it. There is often a silent guilt attached to receiving, as though allowing yourself to have something meaningful somehow leaves someone else without it, as though emotional fulfillment must come at a cost. But life does not move through such narrow equations, even if survival once taught you otherwise. The truth is that Scorpio receiving what belongs to them does not take anything away from anyone else. In many ways, it creates the opposite effect. A Scorpio who no longer fears emotional honesty becomes more grounded, more genuine, more capable of real connection because there is no longer constant negotiation happening beneath the surface. There are no silent emotional bargains being made just to feel safe or accepted. There is simply presence, steady and honest, no longer shaped entirely by fear of emotional exposure. Relationships begin changing when Scorpio stops shrinking emotionally to avoid discomfort. Presence becomes cleaner, more honest, more complete. Boundaries stop feeling like walls built for survival and start becoming clear outlines that protect what is real without hiding it completely. The sense of peace Scorpio has spent years searching for was never meant to come from controlling every emotional current around them. It begins internally, in the moment you stop abandoning yourself just to maintain emotional safety. And there comes a moment in Scorpio's life, maybe you are already living inside it now, when old emotional patterns stop working the way they once did. Not through chaos or dramatic collapse, but through something quieter and much more final. The same emotional distancing that once felt protective begins feeling heavy. The same silence that once created safety begins creating loneliness. The same coping patterns that operated automatically for years begin creating a tension inside you that can no longer be ignored. And once you notice that tension clearly, it becomes almost impossible to return fully to the version of yourself that existed before this awareness began. And Scorpio, being as emotionally perceptive as you are, can already feel that something has shifted. But the shift is not happening outside of you. The world itself has not suddenly changed overnight. What changed is the way you are seeing it now. It is like spending years reinforcing a locked emotional door, only to realize the real exhaustion never came from the door itself, but from living your whole life behind it. From constantly measuring every interaction, every emotion, every risk before allowing yourself to fully step into it. And after a while, survival stops feeling temporary. It begins feeling like identity, until one quiet moment makes you realize how long you have been protecting yourself from life while calling it strength. This is the moment I would call recognition. Not collapse, not destruction, not some dramatic crisis designed to break you apart. It is clarity. And sometimes clarity feels more unsettling than confusion, because once you truly see something, you become responsible for what you know. You can no longer pretend certain emotional truths are invisible once they have already surfaced. There is a certain loneliness that comes with awakening to yourself this deeply, because part of you understands that old emotional patterns can no longer carry you the way they once did. And Scorpio, which has learned for so long how to survive through control and emotional restraint, sometimes instinctively tries to retreat the moment this clarity appears. There is a reflex to return to the old armor, to close the door again, to bury the feeling before it grows too visible. But when the universe has already begun returning what belongs to you, those escape routes slowly begin disappearing. The truth keeps resurfacing in different forms, through different people, different moments, different conversations, but always carrying the same quiet question beneath it all. What are you going to do with what you know now? And what Scorpio knows now is this. There is a version of you that has been waiting beneath the surface for far too long. A version carrying desires you stopped speaking out loud. A voice that became quieter over the years because silence once felt safer than exposure. A way of existing that no longer wants to survive by constantly hiding parts of itself just to remain protected. And beneath all of that, there is also exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying your emotional world alone for so long that vulnerability itself begins to feel unfamiliar. This version of you is no longer willing to stay buried, and the question that matters now is painfully simple. Will you let yourself open the door? Will you allow yourself to exist without shrinking emotionally the moment something real begins reaching toward you? Because the deeper transformation happening now has never been about becoming someone else. It has always been about returning to the self you placed beneath layers of emotional survival. And maybe that is why these days around May 9th and 10th feel so emotionally revealing. Something inside you no longer wants to carry the same weight in silence. Scorpio is beginning to see itself more honestly now, not through performance, not through emotional control, but through recognition. Not the version built to endure everything alone, but the version underneath it all that has been waiting to breathe freely again. The universe was never keeping score against you, Scorpio. It was never sitting in judgment, deciding whether you deserved to receive what belonged to you. That is not how this works. Life simply completes cycles. And this long cycle of emotional guarding, self-protection, silence, and carrying everything internally has finally reached its turning point. What is returning now is not a reward handed down from somewhere outside you. It is the natural consequence of finally becoming emotionally available to yourself again. There is something deeply beautiful in that, especially for Scorpio, because you understand emotional cause and effect instinctively. You notice subtle shifts other people overlook completely. You feel tension beneath words. You sense hidden currents moving underneath situations long before they become visible. And the same emotional sensitivity that once exhausted you is now becoming the very thing that allows you to recognize what is finally returning to your life, as long as you stop closing the door the moment it arrives. Because the peace Scorpio is being guided toward now is not the kind that comes from controlling every emotional outcome around you. It is not the silence created by self-protection. It is the peace that appears when you stop abandoning yourself in order to feel safe. When your boundaries no longer exist to hide you completely, but to define you honestly. When you stop questioning whether you deserve what naturally reaches toward you. The Scorpio who receives is not a different Scorpio. It is simply a whole one. And somewhere, deep beneath all the armor, before words even fully form around it, your spirit already recognizes what is happening now. You are no longer adjusting yourself to survive inside the world around you. Slowly, quietly, the world is beginning to respond to the truth of who you are instead. The universe has not forgotten you. It never did. Every emotion you buried instead of expressing was felt. Every silence you carried while pretending you were fine mattered. Every moment you stepped backward emotionally to protect someone else's comfort left its mark beneath the surface. And now, the current is beginning to shift. Not violently, not all at once, but slowly, precisely, and at exactly the moment your inner doors are finally beginning to open.